We are a digital church on a quest to discover how Jesus helps us live a more meaningful life. We are a community, a space to explore the Christian faith, and a place where you can contribute and grow. Our service will last about an hour, and in a few seconds you'll meet our hosts for our service who will introduce today's talk. After the talk, we will have a time of worship and reflection, after which we head into Conversation Street, where we look at your stories and questions that you've posted in the comments. Now, we want to invite you to connect with us here at Crowd Church, and we've got a few ways in which you can do just that. Firstly, you can engage with Crowd from any device during our live stream, and if you're up for it, why not invite a few friends over and experience the service together? You see, church is all about connecting with God and connecting with others. And one of the easiest ways for you to do that is join one of our midweek groups where we meet online together to catch up and discover more about the amazingness of Christ. You can also subscribe to our fairly new podcast called What's the Story, where we deep dive into stories of faith and courage from everyday people. More information about all of these things can be found on our website at www.crowd.church, or you can reach out to us on social media at Crowd Church. If you are new to Crowd or new to the Christian faith and would like to know what your next steps to take are, well, why not head over to our website, crowd.church/next, for more details. And now, the moment you've been waiting for is here. Our online church service starts right now. Well, good evening and welcome to Crowd Church. It's great that you're here. I'm here with the beautiful Anna. Anna, how are we doing today?
We're good, yeah. Had a lovely, relaxing Sunday. How about you, Matt?
I wish I had a lovely, relaxing Sunday. It's been okay. It's been one of those where I have no idea where the day has gone. Let me tell you. So, yes, it's one of those days. Now, welcome to Crowd Church. If this is your first time with us, a warm welcome to you. We are an online church. For those that might not see the point of church, for those who are looking to understand how Jesus, well, basically gives us meaning in life, really. And we hopefully do that in a non-threatening way. I don't tend to threaten. Do you threaten people, Anna? I don't know.
I try not to. Occasionally my little boy, but not a big helper.
Yeah.
Not generally other adults. How about you? Not really.
No. No. So yeah, welcome to church. It's great that you're here. And of course, if you're a regular, a warm welcome to you as well. I see Mr. Crew is in the comments.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 2-2 in the... I've not actually seen the score for the Liverpool-Arsenal game.
Oh, he's already started the football banter.
No doubt.
Back in season, aren't we, Matt?
Yeah, it's just one of those, isn't it? It's like, oh, okay. Warm welcome to you. Anna, let the good folks know what is happening today.
Yeah, so we've got Pete Farrington joining us in a little bit with a talk that is all about our need for Jesus, and it's part of the continuation of our series that's looking at the Gospel of John and digging into that kind of whole book of the Bible and exploring it a bit more. So we're going to listen to what he's got to say about the next chapter of John's Gospel and then move to some questions afterwards.
Yeah, Conversation Street. Looking forward to it. So we are live on Facebook and YouTube. So if you are joining on the live stream, do feel free to write in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you're watching on catch up, a warm welcome to you. And if you're listening to the podcast, which I know many people now do, a warm welcome to you wherever you are listening to the podcast. We hope that you are enjoying it. And speaking of podcasts, Anna, have you been listening to the What's the Story stuff?
I have. I've really been enjoying it. And I listened to, it was the most recent one, Jen Oliver.
Yeah,
I really
Jen.
enjoyed her one. I think it released earlier this week. So Jen, if you're watching, great. Did really well on that and loved what she had to say just about kind of her relationship with God and lots of different scenarios she'd lived through, like, you know, kind of illness of a partner, miscarriages, death of her dad, like all sorts. It's great. Just as you
Yeah.
say, someone's story about life and how you live every day as a Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, wasn't it? It was one of those where I started doing the conversation with Jen. And sorry, for those of you watching and listening don't know, What's the Story is a new podcast that we've started doing. So as well as the live streams, we now do What's the Story, which is where I basically sit down and chat to people about their faith and about the sort of challenges in life that they faced. And it's a really inspiring conversation because it's just me and them for however long it is. And Jan's turned out to be an hour and a half long. I mean,
Was it that long?
yeah, it's
Wow.
unbelievable. And I just got so sucked into the story, and before I know it's like an hour and a half, I'm like, oh, maybe we should have done this over two.
Right? But
Yeah.
I mean, that is a long one, but it's a great listen. So I totally recommend people tune into it. There's a story out there for everyone on that. I think there's lots of different people's stories, like living through cancer diagnosis and all kinds of stuff, isn't there? So
Yeah, there is. So do check them out. We've got 8 episodes so far. We've got some more coming up. We've got a long list of people waiting to be interviewed for What's the Story. So as we get it off the ground, do join in, do subscribe if you like that kind of thing. It'd be great to see you in there. So it's on YouTube, it is on it's on YouTube, and it's on wherever you get your podcast from. That's where it's.
And maybe if anyone else is watching has got an interesting story, like also we could dig into that as well. So do let us know if you've got an interesting story to tell.
Yeah, actually, if you want to be featured on the What's the Story podcast, if you go to the Crowd Church website, there is a little link on the What's the Story page which says be a guest. And if you click that, there's a little form to fill out. If you fill out that form, it'd be great to hear from you. All the information's on there that you need to know about. So do check that out.
Yeah.
So who else have we got here? We've got Matt, we've got Sharon, we've got Miriam, we've got George in the comments. Good evening, everybody. Great to see you in there. Evening, Queen of Rhino Church. Matt Crew's going to get punched in the head by Sharon. I think that's just what's going to happen. But there you go. Sorry about the in-jokes, but I will try and video it when it happens and put it on the Facebook page because you're going to want to see that. So,
it's like Farrington Street coming out tonight, isn't there?
Yeah.
Sorry, everyone. We're not normally like this.
Yeah, there is. Should we get into the talk? Oh, hi, Sarah.
I think we better have.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the comments and trying to talk at the same time. I can't multitask, apparently. So let's get into the talk from Pete Farrington. Like Anna said, we'll be back after this with Conversation Street. Do write your thoughts, comments, stories. Just contribute as the talk is going on. I'll be in there. Anna will be in there. George will be in there. Matt will be in there, I've no doubt. So come join us in the comments. It'd be great to see you in there. And then after this talk, and then after a brief time of worship, and then I'll be back at Conversation Street. So I am looking for the button on my pad. I think here it is. Right, we'll see you in a second. No, it's not working. Right.
Oh, you're having a real IT day, aren't we? Me and Matt were saying this before we started, that like my internet dropped out twice while we were preparing. You were saying like you didn't have all the stuff ready. Yeah, it's going smoothly tonight.
Yeah, it's going.
So bear with us, everyone. It's going to be one of those evenings already.
Really polished. Right, here's the talk.
Hello, Crowd Church. It's lovely to be with you. And today we are continuing in our series on the Gospel of John. And I've been tasked with walking us through John chapter 4, verse 43 to John chapter 6, verse 24. There's an awful lot in there, and there's no way that we can look at it all in detail today. So I encourage you to read through it for yourself. But this passage continues in a series of 4 interactions that Jesus has with very different individuals. John chapter 3 begins with the very famous conversation that Jesus has with Nicodemus, who was a Pharisee and a ruler of the Jews. And Jesus brings this man a strong challenge, telling him, no, you haven't understood the scriptures. The whole thing points to me, and you need to be born again. Then in John chapter 4, Jesus interacts with a woman the Samaritan woman at the well. And he confronts her about her sin and then comforts her with the gospel. It's a brilliant conversation, and the woman is doing her best to to avoid the challenge, trying to change the topic again and again. But Jesus gets her there in the end. Then after that, we see Jesus' encounter with a Roman official who was probably a Roman centurion in the service of Herod Antipas. We'll come back to this guy in a minute. But after that, Jesus then heals an invalid in John chapter 5. And he brings this man a challenge too. I encourage you to read it. But it's after that healing that tension then really starts to spike between Jesus and the Jews. And Jesus makes a lot of outrageous claims about himself. Well, they're outrageous if they're not true. And he becomes even more of a controversial figure as a result of that. But going back to those 4 encounters, the first thing that really struck me was just how different these 4 people were. So they were of different ethnicities, different stratas of society, different levels of societal influence and being accepted by society, different classes. But there are also striking similarities across all 4 encounters. And I think the first one to note is that they all come to Christ in the exact same manner, with great need and with great longing, but with more need than they were even aware of at first, just like us all. And Jesus meets with each individual and treats them as such, and he sees beyond their felt need. We live in very strange times where many are trying to slice up all of reality into neat categories of those who are oppressed and those who are oppressors, and really pitting one group against another, and in many cases confusing their hatred of one group for their love of another. But Jesus did not interact with these people according to how the world might have perceived them, or how we would perceive people today, according to where everyone is placed on the oppressor-oppressed spectrum. So he didn't say, "Ooh, a poor dirty invalid," but he also didn't say, "Ooh, a privileged man in a position of power. Gross." We see many times in Scripture that Jesus shows that God shows no partiality, and that to do so is sin. We also see from these 4 interactions that Jesus had a clear challenge for each person. So I really encourage you to walk through the entirety of today's passage in your own time. But for now, I'd like to hone in on Jesus' encounter with the Roman official, which is in John chapter 4, verse 46. So I'll just read through it. So he came again, that's Jesus, he came again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked him the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So just listen to the way that Jesus responds to this man's request. It is absolutely not an answer that I can imagine would ever console anyone in such a situation. Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." So this man's son is on his deathbed, and Jesus is this guy's last hope. And this is what Jesus said: "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The Greek terms used in this verse are plural. So Jesus is saying, you people. It's like, you people want signs and wonders. And if you don't get them, you people will not believe. I imagine to the official that this response would have seemed like rejection. Like, okay, that's it. There's there's nothing more I can do. And at first glance, it feels really cold and harsh. I mean, just imagine being his disciples. Like, no, Jesus, what are you doing? This is not the time. This man's son is on his deathbed. Have a bit of compassion. But Jesus is setting up a challenge for the official. Are you willing to trust me without seeing proof? So we really have to ask the question, what is Jesus's ultimate concern here? He wants to develop and perfect a weak faith. I heard a friend say just last week that God cares more about your character than your comfort. She was absolutely right. God cares more about your sanctification, that is the process of him making you more like him, than he does about your current situation. Now, the official responds by saying, "Sir, come down before my child dies." So it's almost like what Jesus said has gone in one ear and come out the other. Jesus is trying to make a theological point, and the man clearly had some level of faith. Like, he clearly, to some degree, believes that Jesus can heal his son. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made the trip if his son is on his deathbed. Maybe he'd heard the story of how Jesus had turned water into wine. But Jesus was saying, I can do far more than what you were asking. Do you think I need to come with you in order to heal your boy? Do you think I'm hindered by the constraints of time and space? But more importantly, Jesus was saying, you need far more than what you are asking. But the man is just in absolutely no state of mind to hear. He's like, what has this got to do with my dying son? And he just repeats the same request, almost as if he hadn't heard what Jesus had said. But Jesus then says, go, your son will live. That's in verse 50. I think what's really interesting here, and what is quite easy to miss, is that there is a no implied in Jesus' response. He says no to part of the man's request. And he says no to the part without which the man thought the miracle wouldn't be possible. Jesus says, no, I'm not coming down with you. An old school theologian called Charles Spurgeon said about this man, here then is the weakness of your faith. Though there is much excellence in it because it makes you pray, there is some fault in it because it makes you imprudently prescribe to the Almighty how he shall bless you, and makes you in effect to impugn his sovereignty, and leads you ignorantly to dictate to him in what form the promised boon shall come. And I think Spurgeon's absolutely right. The way that this man responds to Jesus' challenge, and I think the way that we so often do, puts us above God and dictates to him how it is that he should answer our prayers, by what deadline, in what manner, and whether or not he should even grant us our requests. But the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. So he took Jesus at his word and left him. Imagine walking away from Jesus, whom you see as your last hope, without even being given a sign as evidence of the miracle. You're just going off this story that you've heard about water being turned into wine, and just taking this man at his word. And we see here that faith is really trust and obedience. It's not enough to merely know something. So the man clearly knew something of Jesus. Like he's maybe heard the story about the wedding in Cana, but it isn't enough to simply acquire knowledge and subscribe to or affirm a particular set of statements about God. That isn't what faith is. Faith is to depend on him and to act in accordance. Do you trust that you can lean into him with the weight of all your need, all your guilt, your shame, your hopes and your longings? Do you believe the totality of who he is and all that he says about himself? And not just the stuff that gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling during a worship song. Not just when the water gets turned into wine, but when you have to simply take him at his word, turn around and go home. It's astonishing. Spurgeon then goes on to say, that is an heroic faith which believes Christ in the teeth of 1,000 contradictions. When the Lord gives you that faith, you can say, I consult not with flesh and blood. He who said to me, believe and be saved, gave me grace to believe, and I therefore am confident that I am saved. When I once cast my soul, sink or swim, upon the love and blood and power of Christ, though conscience give no witness to my soul, though doubts distress me and fears plague me, yet it is mine to honour my Master by believing his word, though it be contradictory to sense, though reason rebel against it, and present feeling dare to give it the lie. I think for quite some time now, there's been a huge amount of emphasis placed on the goodness of God, and that God has good things in store for you. And I've no problem with this at all, but I do think that our problem is that all too often we go around coming up with our own definition of what good means. And I think there is a big problem when we focus on certain aspects of God's nature at the total expense of others. So in this instance, God's sovereignty, God's godness, that he is not man and we are not God. And we end up with a minuscule box that we're trying to cram God into, to shape him into some form that really looks as much like that looks as much like us as possible, and a box which we could never fit a verse like this, for example, from Isaiah 55. For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We are not God, and we cannot dictate to God how it is that he should deal with us. We have to take him at his word, and we have to come to the scriptures and see how it is that God defines good, and how it is that God has revealed himself. And God is concerned with your ultimate good, namely that you find deep, lasting joy in him, not just temporary, fleeting joy in your immediate circumstances. He's far more concerned with your eternal good than your tomorrow's good. And when we decide that God being good means that he will bring about a certain outcome in a certain way by a certain deadline, we actually do set ourselves above God, and we twist his arm to try and get him to do the things the way that we would do them. And I think this is really a form of idolatry or self-worship, when we try and fashion a God in our own image instead of allowing him to conform us to his image. I've thought about these things a lot since becoming a dad, because many of the things that I do for my son's good probably do not feel all that pleasant from his perspective. So like, he absolutely hates it when I wash his hair, when I brush his teeth. When he was really little, he used to hate it when I had to use a nasal aspirator. It was really gross, and you got to suck the snot out of his nose. But I do those, and I didn't particularly enjoy it, but I do those things for his good. And because I have an understanding of what good is that he's completely incapable of grasping, at least for now. And we all know that if a child is never told no, they grow up to be spoiled, selfish, and just not very pleasant people to be around. And there have been many times in my walk with God where I've pleaded with God for a certain outcome that I was convinced would be good, only in time to see that God had a better idea. There's you may have heard of a missionary called Elizabeth Elliot. Her husband was killed by the the Auca people of Ecuador, I think in 1956. They were trying to reach the Auca people with the gospel. And an incredible woman, Elizabeth Elliot, said this: God never withholds from his child that which his love and wisdom call good. God's refusals are always merciful, or severe mercies at times, but mercies all the same. God never denies us our heart's desire except to give us something better. So he never withholds from us those things which his love and his wisdom call good. And we see in John chapter 4 verse 52 that as the official is on his way home, he's brought the news that his son is well, he's alive, and they said to him that it was yesterday, the 7th hour, that the fever left him. And the father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, and all his household. So the man's son was healed at the very moment that Jesus had spoken the word. But he didn't find out until the following day. I was reminded when reading this of something that a preacher called John Piper has said, that God is always doing 10,000 things in your life, and you may be aware of 3 of them. So God's doing 10,000 things in your life at all times, and that's even when he gives you a partial no, or maybe even a total no. Think of Elizabeth Elliot, her husband, killed by the very people that they had gone to reach with the gospel. But we see it in this passage, when we take a step back, we see the progression of this man's faith. At the beginning, Jesus says, unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe. And then later we see that the man believed the word that Jesus had spoken and went on his way. And then at the end, this man believed along with his whole house. So in the middle there, it was like this man believed that Jesus was going to heal his son. But then at the end of the story, we see that faith perfected, and this man believing on Jesus, not just for him to do this one thing for him, but trusting him. And we see that this is actually the purpose. John tells us towards the end of John's gospel that this is the purpose of the entire book. It says in John 20 verse 31, "But these things are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." Jesus himself said in John 5 verse 24, "Truly, truly I say to you, whoever hears my word and believes him who sent me has eternal life. He does not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life." And so I go back to those words of Charles Spurgeon, and we must cast everything that we have upon the love, the blood, and the power of Christ. And for those who do so, we are transformed, and we pass from death to life, and we have life in Jesus. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.
How deep the Father's love for us, how vast beyond all measure, that he should give his only Son to make a wretch his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss, the Father turns his face away, as wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. ashamed, I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom, but I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot give an answer, but this I know with all my heart: his wounds have paid my ransom.
So, there you go. That was Mr. Pete Farrington, followed along by actually his brother, John Farrington, doing the worship. So, Farrington
Talented
duo
family.
right there. Absolutely. So, how did you find that talk, Mrs. Kessel?
I thought it was good. It's very challenging, wasn't it? I mean,
Yeah, Pete was straight
yeah,
to
there's
it,
a
wasn't
few
he?
like ouch moments. I think a lot of people said that in the comments too. So
Yeah, there's definitely no punches spared. I think to follow our early analogies of getting slapped. But yeah, I thought what a phenomenal talk, and really interesting that he drew out the story that he did out of that whole passage. That was the thing that he sort of focused in on. What do you think? What was the thing that stood out? What was your ouch moment?
I mean, there was a couple for me. One of them was I'm just going back to it now, where he said, just looking for it. One of them was where he said, like, God is always doing like, maybe 1,000 or 10,000 things in your life, but you may only be aware of 3 of them.
Yeah.
And I think it links to that thing of like his ways are higher than ours, and that whole idea that like we sometimes say, God, why didn't you do that, or why didn't you answer this prayer? And we look at things in such a human way, like what we want to happen. And kind of I know I so often approach God like that in my prayers and in my conversation with him. I'm like, God, I want this outcome, please do it for me. And then I get a bit annoyed if he doesn't. And and I think that's probably quite normal. That's probably how a lot of people relate to God too much, if we're honest. And but like, what if like he's doing all these other things for me behind the scenes that I'm totally oblivious to, like protecting me and working other things for my good, that maybe like, there's blessings in all of our lives, aren't there? There's countless blessings, but like maybe God is working all these things for good in our lives, but we just don't notice them or see them because we don't see it behind the scenes, or like all that he's doing all the time. And often we take it for granted and we only notice stuff when it goes wrong. But actually, when things are going right in our lives, it's like, who knows what God's doing, like to bless us in that moment. And yeah, it just really stuck with me. I just thought, oh gosh, yeah, I tend to focus on these negative things. and when it doesn't work out the way I think it should. But what about all those times it does? Like, is God in those moments too? Of course he is. But like, I think it's human nature. Sometimes we go to the, negative more than the positives. And yeah, I just think there's so much of what God's doing that we're not God. We don't see what he's doing at all. But yeah, I think I have a tendency to hone in on when it doesn't seem to work out rather than all the times that it does.
I think I agree. I think it's a common human trait, isn't it? That actually, when you have a source of pain, that's all you can really focus on. You don't focus on everything else. And I think it's easy. I find it easy in some respects when you're with other people to judge them in terms of when they're going through something that is painful. That's all they can focus on. That's their whole world. And so in their mind, everything is going wrong. But of course, you can point out 10,000 things that are going right because you're not limited by that pain, are you? You're not drawn in by that. And so I find it very easy to help other people see the other 10,000 things, but not so easy to make myself sit back and see the other 10,000 things. And I think you're right. How often do we talk ourselves out of the fact that God's doing something remarkable in our lives because of one thing going over here, which is not quite going how we think it should go? And I think that was a bit that when Pete started off with that, it was like the response that Jesus gave was probably not the one that you'd want to give in the modern world, is it? And he just goes, no, I'm not going there. But of course, if he doesn't go, then in the centurion's mind, the servant doesn't get healed, right? He doesn't get better. So by saying no here, it stops it's like, well, hang on, no, this is the first gate we've got to get through. And and that limiting God to going through just the gates that we give him, I think is quite fascinating. And we do it so often. And that prescription, God, you've got to answer this prayer. And this is the exact roadmap. I think you should do that.
Yeah. This is the way you should answer it. This is my time scale. And, I know you're God and you might have some other ideas, but I think my idea is best. Yeah. We're all guilty of that, aren't we? Like, that's thoroughly human. And anyone who says they don't do that is lying, I know.
Yeah.
Me and Matt definitely do.
All the time. I remember years ago, I worked for a guy called Simon O'Shaughnessy, and Simon, lovely fella, and I'm still really good friends with Simon. And Simon, I was working for him. He decided that he was going to sell his company that I was working for, and he was going to move to New Zealand. That's what he felt God was saying to him. Well, Sharon and I, praying about this when we found out the news, we're kind of thinking, well, does that mean I'm going to be out of a job? What's going to happen with the people by the company? Do you know what I mean? All those things that go through your head. We both felt God say to us separately, you know what, Matt, I'm going to give you that company. And we were like, okay, Sharon felt that and I felt that. And I just thought, okay, so we talked to each other about it, but didn't talk to anybody else about it. And I definitely didn't mention it to Simon because I didn't want to be seen to be manipulating anything in any way. Do you know what I mean? It's like, God, if you're going to do this, then fair play. But not only did Simon not give me the company, he sold it to somebody else. And not only did the person that he sold it to not give me the company, I ended up leaving because myself and the person that bought it, for whatever reason, we had to part ways. Let's just put it that way. We didn't really get on that well. And so here I am. Josh was practically a newborn. I am without a job. I'm without an income. I have a newborn baby. My wife has given up work because we have a newborn baby. And I'm stood there going, God, hang on a minute. You said, do you know what I mean? And it wasn't until 5 years later, it was almost 5 years to the day, that company was in effect given to me. Do you know what I mean? But I didn't see, when I heard what I heard, God is good, God's going to give me this business. I didn't see that meaning 5 years of a really fascinating journey to get there. Does that make sense? God neglected to tell me that bit. But what was fascinating was I'd 10,000 things, right? All I saw was actually, no, this business I thought God was going to give me is in the hands of somebody else. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But I always think of the when I think of stories like that, and you hear them a lot, don't you? Like God takes the less direct route than we might have chosen to get us somewhere, and you feel like God's more about teaching us through the journey than getting us to the destination quickly, like to the end point. The end point isn't necessarily the only goal, which I think he picked up on, didn't he? God's more interested in our character than our comfort sometimes. Which I don't think it's that God doesn't care about our comfort. I don't think it is meant in that way that like God wants to give us discomfort. But I think God certainly is interested in the sort of journey to get there. He's not interested in getting us to destination quick. Like I often feel like the destination isn't the only point in life. Like God's actually interested in the journey. And it makes me think of like the Israelites in the book of Exodus in the Bible, because, they did a journey that should have just been days. And it took them like years and years in the desert to get somewhere that you could have actually got to in days if you just done the journey directly. But getting there fast wasn't necessarily God's point. It was like working with them, working through their disobedience, dealing with their hearts and their trust in him and all of this other stuff. Yeah. And, living in the wilderness for years and years isn't comfortable, is it? It's like all through the Bible, I think.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating, isn't it? And when they lived in the wilderness, were they living there because God wanted them there because they were so pig-headed? That's where they needed to be, just to learn a few. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? There's so many things you can sort of sit and think about. But you're right, that whole God is interested in our comfort because he comforts us. He comforts us when we mourn. We know that from the Bible. But God is very much interested in our character. And I loved Pete's analogy, actually, where he said, you know what? There are many things that I do for my young son, which I consider to be good, that he does not consider to be good. But my understanding of what is good and his are very different. And Pete's quite right in the sense of actually this is his role as a father. No, you clean your teeth, kids. Not because I'm trying to win any contest for popularity with you, but because I understand why you need to clean your teeth. Do you see what I mean? And there's that, I thought it was a very simple analogy, which kind of goes, yeah, I'm not God. God's God. He sees the end from the beginning. And so I have to trust that actually, whilst I don't understand what's going on at the moment, that ultimately God's plan is one that is good. Do you see what I mean? Yeah.
And it's a lovely analogy, really, because it's not perfect, but it's like the closest like we've got, really, isn't there, to understanding that God's perspective is much greater than our perspective. Obviously, he's God. And it's like we do have, as parents, we have a much greater perspective on life than our 2-year-olds who are just purely interested in their instant comfort and entertainment. And that's pretty much all they think about at that stage of life. And yeah, it is quite a good analogy for thinking God's view and perspective of the world and of our lives is so much bigger than we understand or can comprehend. Yeah.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? Let me see if I can get this to work. I'm going to try and put the Spurgeon quote on the screen. Don't know if it's going to work or not. So let's click the button and see what happens, shall we? Oh, yes, there it goes.
Good.
It's got my photo just because I put the quote on Facebook, but I'm not Spurgeon. Just want to point that out. So here then is the weakness of your faith. Though there is much excellent in it because it makes you pray, there is some fault in it because it makes you imprudently prescribe to the Almighty how he shall bless you. It makes you, in effect, impugn his sovereignty and leads you ignorantly to dictate to him in what form the promised boon shall come. And you're just kind of like, I mean, I wouldn't have used that language because obviously I live in a different era to Spurgeon, but I thought, what an interesting insight that actually, here is the weakness of your faith. Though it is excellent because you pray, it is weak because you are dictating, in effect, to the Almighty what has to happen. And I love that. I'm guilty of it. That's my problem.
Yeah, I think we all are. And this is something I feel really challenged about, like prayer, it's so easy to just come to God with a shopping list of stuff you want him to do.
Mm.
You know, almost like your relationship with God feels like a self-improvement plan. Like, God, help this meeting that I'm doing later today go well, and help me get success here, and help my child do better there, and, you know, and so on and so on. And actually, prayer is about a two-way conversation with God, and that is something I'm really challenged about at the moment. And that actually, I need to do a whole lot less talking in my relationship with God, and a whole lot more listening. And if you're like, you know, like, I think probably both you and I are fairly extroverted personality types, Matt. But if you're like someone who likes to talk and thinks you know what's right already, that's really hard to do. But I'm like really learning to, and it doesn't come naturally to me, but I'm learning to choose to sometimes just come to God with no agenda, and to just sit and be in his presence, and to maybe see if he's got anything to say to me, or to just drop into my mind, rather than just always come with my agenda and talk at him, tell him what I want. Because, yeah, I don't know, it just feels like that's not a two-way relationship. But that's very hard to do, especially for people that don't easily sit in silence for long period or even short periods of time. It's challenging, isn't it?
Oh, massively. But it is so life-giving all at the same time. And I totally see that. I think for me, it's one of those things where I'm finding, as Matt Crew said in the comments, he likes to remind me of my age. He said, you're more ancient than Spurgeon, Matt Edmondson. Thanks, Matt. But as me and Charles walk the earth, and I'm still walking, I kind of think faith becomes about believing the promises of God, right? And we know that faith is about believing the promises of God. But like you say, for so many years, that meant actually the promise, or the faith target, for want of a better expression, often would come from me. You know, God, this is what I want. This is what I'm in faith for. This is what I'm believing for. But the older that I get, the more I realize those faith targets, whatever they are, should come from God. And it should be God whispering those and saying, right, this is what's going to, you know, this is what we're planning, Matt. And I think so often God gives us a sort of a destination or a direction, but he doesn't give us those instant steps every day that we need to take. And that's the walk of faith, isn't it? It's like, right, he didn't say to me, Matt, I'm going to give you the business, but it's going to be in 5 years. And to get there, you're going to have to go through X, Y, and Z. Now, maybe you would have done had I have listened. Maybe. Or maybe it was just a case of, actually, Matt, this is what I said. Dude, it's what I said. What's wrong with you? This is what I've said. Do you know what I mean? And that constant reaffirmation, and actually, no, this is what God said, regardless of what's going on around me. Anya put here in the comments, see if I can add this. I'm loving this add to broadcast thing. The only thing that I'm certain is that God has a plan for me. Go. You can comment on this one, Anya.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think that I agree. And the more I go on in life, it's like I'm not actually so sure that like my way is the right way. And I think as you get older, you just realize you're not always right, and you're not always, you know, what you want isn't necessarily what's right for you. And yeah, I think it's, you know, that I love what she says, because it's like holding your plans slightly. Like, I think I said this on my podcast, actually, going back to that. I said, I've learned, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's to like, it's okay to plan, but write those plans in pencil. And it's kind of the same thing. Yeah. And it's like that it's okay to have ideas and plans, especially if you're strategic type. Like, we both work in marketing, right? So we're used to planning, but I think it's okay to have plans, but to hold them lightly before God, and to be open to his like edits and changes and detours and redirecting you. And ultimately God is the master planner, isn't he? Like, we're not in charge of this world, of our own lives even fully. He gives us some autonomy, but you know, ultimately, yeah, he, you know, it is his plan. And so I think the best posture is, God, these are my ideas, but you know, over to you. Like, I surrender them, and hold them lightly before you.
Yeah.
And actually, I feel like when I hold them too tightly and I'm clinging tight to them, that's when life feels a lot harder, quite often. It's a lot easier to walk through life a bit more open-handed, I think.
Yeah. That's a really interesting, that's really powerful. And it's a lot easier to walk through it's a lot easier to walk through life a little bit more open-handed
Yeah.
than trying to hold on to everything so tight. I think it's such a true and powerful statement, isn't it? I love what Miriam put here in the comments. Let me see if I can find it. God's plan for us is awesome. What do you think to that?
Yeah, I think she's right. Like, God is good, isn't he? He's an awesome God, so I'm sure that's true. But I think it's still an act of faith to believe that, isn't it? Especially when life's throwing you a hard deal. Like, that's easy to believe when life's going well. But it is that thing of like you begin to question or doubt if something really difficult comes your way, if you go through a season of pain or loss or all kinds of difficult stuff that we talk about here at Crowd. And yeah, it doesn't make it less true, but I think it's harder to believe that when you're going through those seasons, as we said. But absolutely, that it's, it's keeping in those times, it's, as we said before, it's trying to keep sight of the big picture, isn't it? Not just your immediate pain. It's like God's in that and he cares about that, but also there is still a bigger picture.
Yeah, there is a bigger picture, and it's interesting actually, because again, going back to something that Pete said, and just touching on what Miriam said about God's plan being awesome, you first have to define what you mean by awesome. Just like we have to define what we mean by good, because we have definitions of what that means, and usually it means something good for me. Or if God's plan is awesome, that means I've got an awesome life in front of me.
Yeah,
and
true.
your interpretation and twisting of that is quite fascinating. I've got a lovely friend called Felicity. And Felicity is just one of my favourite people on the planet. I get to, they live in a different country, but one day of the year we get to hang out with them, and she's just lovely. And I always remember a conversation I had with Felicity about this word awesome, and her belief that actually we overuse it in the English language. She said she heard somebody in a coffee shop say, "Oh, that panini looks awesome," and she's like, "No, how can a panini be awesome? God is awesome. A panini is a panini." Do you know what I mean? And that sort of trivial use of language, and you're kind of like, "No, God, you are full of awe. You are full of wonder. You are God. You are Lord. You are the supreme, dude." And actually knowing that, holding, as you say, plans lightly in my hand, well, that's what we call submission to the Lordship of Christ, right? That's recognizing that God truly is awesome, that his plan, his ways are awesome. But that also means they are, as Pete read out, they are way beyond our thinking, right? I'm like Pete's 2-year-old son, not understanding why I've got to clean my teeth, not understanding why I've got to brush my hair and wash my face. I don't want to, and I throw my tantrums. But actually, when we stand back and see that actually God is awesome regardless. Hard, like you say, hard to do, but super powerful, right? Yeah. Super, super powerful.
Yeah, for sure.
Really good stuff. Really good stuff, Mr. Farrington. I've enjoyed this particular conversation and this particular talk. I thought that was a really good topic. And deep diving onto, because you said it as well, isn't it? That actually this is true, right? Regardless of what we think, it's not always the popular opinion. It's not always easy street. But returning back to this fundamental truth that Jesus is Lord is kind of at the heart of the gospel.
Yeah, for sure. It's, as you say, it's not popular, and it's not even something we always enjoy. Like, it's painful, isn't it? Sometimes we'd rather be in control of our own lives. And I think so much of it is about control. It's like, I want to control the outcomes. I want to control my own life. I want to be my own mini lord of my own life, really, if we're honest. And yeah, you're right. It's coming back to the Lordship of Christ, isn't it? That actually submitting to that rather than kind of our own lordship. And I think, we live in a world which is so, it's so kind of individualistic now. It's all about your own needs and your own desire, and consumer culture and the whole world we live in now. I think probably even more than, the time when this story was told in Jesus's time, it's much more, we think about, our individualistic needs a lot more. We think about, everything's very immediate, very consumer led. We choose what we want and we buy instantly online, don't we? And so I think this is really hard for us to get our heads around. Like, we don't have control over everything. And, like, that's okay if we, and I think I used to really struggle with this. I am a bit of a control freak by nature, but I think the thing that squares it for me is learning or realizing that the one that you're putting faith in, though, is worthy of trusting. And I think that's the thing that squares it for me. It's like, I will trust God because I believe he's good and he's awesome and he's for me and all of those things that we've said. I think if you don't truly believe that is what God is like, it's very hard to fully trust him and surrender to him, really. So a lot of it's about trusting God as who he says he is.
That's such a powerful point, isn't it? That actually when you understand that truth about God, I think faith becomes easier. But if in your head God is not like that, it becomes much, much harder. I remember the conversation with Jen. We were talking about Jen's story on What's the Story podcast. And for me, the thing about doing that podcast and interviewing people like yourself, like Jen and various others, is actually everybody has these challenges. Everybody face really complex situations in life. And for me, the inspiring ones are the ones that go, I don't know. I don't know the answers. I don't know why. I can't tell you why I'm in pain. I want it to stop. But in the midst of that, I am going to rise. And rise doesn't mean, like the self-improvement rise, like I'm going to rise up and conquer, do you know what I mean, and take the land. It's rising. For me, rising up is a case of holding out your hands and going, God, I don't know, but I do know enough to trust you because you are good. Yeah. And that's as far as they can. So many of the stories, that's as far as they could get, was just in tears, just saying that over and over again. And ultimately, I think it's incredible, and I think it's inspiring when you have that unshakable faith like that. It doesn't change situations and circumstances overnight, but man, it's from me listening to all the stories, it's inspiring, super inspiring.
Yeah, that's good.
So I think we shall end. I'm just going down the comments here. God's plan for Stephen was awesome, says, let me add this to podcast. God's plan for Stephen was awesome. Paul's life for God was awesome. We don't understand it, but God does. So for those of you who may not understand, Stephen was the first martyr in the Bible. He was stoned to death for his faith in the book of Acts. We will get on to Stephen's story as we go through the book of Acts in the new year. Paul was the Apostle Paul, who wrote most of the New Testament. What a colourful life he had, to say the least. And so, we don't understand it. And there's a lot of stuff going on. You kind of go, why? But again, in the midst of that, going, God, we trust you, is just extraordinary thing to be able to do. So Matt says here, as we approach the end of our live stream, if you are watching or listening along and need prayer, get in touch with us via DM at Crowd Church on Instagram or Facebook. Love it, Matt. Matt, you're right. Totally right.
It's doing a job for you tonight, Matt.
It's awesome.
Thanks for saying it. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah. I say I couldn't have put it better myself. It does go without saying, of course, if you would like, we are a church. We do believe in prayer. We do believe God answers prayer, not always in the way that we want him to, as the centurion found out earlier, and as we've been talking about. But we still pray, we still believe God is good, and we still believe God can intervene. So if there's anything you would like prayer for, do get in touch with us and let us know. Sheila got in touch with us earlier on Instagram. We sent a message back saying, listen, praying for your mum, which is, what she asked us for. So absolutely. Just get in there, send your prayer requests. We would love to hear from you. Matt has also put here in the comments, Where did it go? I've seen it. Oh, here we go. Join us on Wednesday for our midweek prayer groups. Check out website Crowdchurch for more information. So yes, we do gather during the week for a prayer group. If you'd like to come along and connect with people, get to know people, we'd love to see you there. George has put in the comments here. Join us next week, where Jack Mariner talks through the next passage in John's Gospel, all about the bread of life. I was having a phenomenal chat with John Harding about the next passage.
Interesting.
Yeah. I didn't realise this, but did you know that Bethlehem means house of bread?
I did not know that. That is interesting.
Ah, yes. So that's a little tidbit for you for next week ahead of
Tune in,
next week.
people. It sounds like it's going to be exciting.
It's going to be a doozy. Oh, yes. And as you would expect, conversations with John Harding, we get deep into biblical Greek and Hebrew, because he's on one now, isn't he, doing his Hebrew stuff. So, yeah, it's been great to be with you this week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being in the comments. Do come back and join us next week. Anna, anything else from you?
Just to say, have a great week, everyone. Be blessed, and stay in touch if you need anything like prayer or anything else, like we've said.
Absolutely. Yeah, do come join us next week. So that's it from myself, from Anna. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for joining us in the comments and for all your kind and wonderful comments. It's been so good to hear from you guys today. We will see you next week. The live stream is going to end now. So that's it from myself. That's it from Anna. Bye for now.
See ya.